All right. I don't even know where to begin with these, though. What to say? I'll just kind of.
You gotta wing it.
What's your earliest memory?
Not as early as Carolyn's. I can't even remember my grandfather, Anderson. I used to sit on the bank, they'd tell me, talking to him all the time. Earliest memory.
So Grandpa Anderson would have been your mom's
Yeah.
dad.
Yeah. That's the one we referred to as Pops.
Pops.
I didn't know that at the time, but I can remember when he died, and I was terrified about that because he was breathing like that, and I don't know how old I was, pretty little.
Would that have been on the farm?
That was at
The homestead?
No, that was across the street. They had moved. Mom and Dad had moved into the big house. They called that the big house. And then that white house with the slate siding on it was Uncle Marvin's house, and that I don't know what happened with that whole deal, but Uncle Marvin, they were living at Uncle Marvin's house, and we were living in the big house on the farm. And I remember going around the back side of the house, and then I was scared. I thought something bad was going to happen, and it did. He died.
Talk about that house, the first homestead. That's the one that was up in Fort Vallavon.
Mm-hmm. Stucco.
Share some memories you have from there.
I remember we had a wood stove in the basement, and there was a big floor register in the living room, and that was the heat source, and I think there were registers going upstairs too. Place was kind of interesting because there was a third story to it that was just a tiny little room up there, and I don't know what it was for, but it always intrigued me. I'd go up there. I don't know, to be alone or whatever, but
There was the cabin as well. That
actually I remember that. Before that, I remember falling in the creek, and I remember sitting there when Mom would go over to the big house to her parent. They were living there at the time. We were living in a log cabin, and she would go over to the big house, and I would stay there alone, and I remember hearing this. I think it was my heart beating or something. I was quiet, sitting there. Yeah, falling in the creek. I was out by that drainage ditch that runs past the house there. In the spring, got to be quite a little creek, and it was full of water, and I probably wasn't supposed to be there. I'm not sure, but I stepped on one of those tufts, and it was still okay. I was going to jump to another tuft. Well, that other tuft was not solid ground. And then I hit the bank and slid down. My feet were on the bottom, but it was over my head. I remember bouncing up and down a couple times, screaming and hollering.
It was cold?
It was cold too. I kind of scrambled up the bank. I remember screaming, running towards the house. My clothes were kind of half froze already. It was spring, of course, but it was freezing out. Of course, my mother was quite upset, and I guess I got forgiven for all the things that I shouldn't have been doing at the time because I was okay.
What did they do for money? For work and stuff?
Well, at that time, Grandpa or Dad and Pops were farming together, and they had you had mentioned in the eulogy about the John Deere tractor. Actually, they had a General tractor It was a one wheel in the front, not very big. I don't think it could have been more than 15 horse, something like that. And that's what they were pulling that cabin with, pulling on it. And they farmed, and Grandpa had that team of horses, Beeb and Twits. And you've heard the story about me getting kicked and all that stuff.
Well, say it again. This is,
Okay.
this is about me hearing it. This is about the camera hearing it.
I think Dad had used a team of horses, and he took the harnesses off of them, and I think he was either him or Grandpa was oiling them up. They oiled them. I remember that. That might have been a separate instance, but he had curried the horses with a curry comb, and he told me to give me the curry comb and told me to put it back. Well, he forgot that there was an orange crate nailed to the wall, one of the old wooden orange crates, and that was formed a shelf. And of course, it was above the horse's back, and I was trying to throw the curry comb up to, I couldn't reach that. It wasn't nowhere close. I was throwing it up there, and it kept falling on the horse. And I remember the horse kicking a couple of times, but then one time it kicked and it got me. And they found me laying in the opposite gutter across the walkway there, unconscious. Put me in the hospital. I think I stayed overnight. I don't remember the kick part of it at all. I remember last thing I remember is throwing that curriculum up there. But that all, I don't think there's any permanent injury.
Used to find Indian heads and stuff like that.
Arrowheads?
Arrowheads, yeah.
Well, that was up on Nolan's field. We rented some additional pasture, and that was on the extreme, on the other side of the road, next 80 acres over, I think, and they call it Nolan's, and that was all open field at the time, and most of it was anyway. And we pastured that, and there would be gopher mounds out there, and they would have, you'd find an arrowhead in the top of them. Dad found most of those. That's the field I learned to drive in too. This was later on with the Studebaker pickup. I believe it was an 1848 Studebaker. Dad was out in the field. This was quite a while later. I don't know how old I was then. Probably 8, 10, something like that. And he started the truck, and put it in gear and got it moving, and then got out. Let me steer it. And I went around and around in a circle. That's my first driving experience. I remember hollering, "How do I make it stop?" He said, "You push in the clutch." Well, I didn't know what the clutch was. I think I did get something figured out towards the end. I don't remember how that all ended, but probably was a while before I tried it again, or even wanted to try it again. I used to go get the cows in the morning, and the cold dew in the summertime was cold on your feet. We did that down when we moved to Grantsburg too. I remember it more so in Grantsburg than I do up there. Feet being really cold, you'd find a warm cow pie and you'd stand in it for a while to warm your feet up. So all of us kids would have green toes all summer long. Everybody went barefoot all summer. That's the way it was. Back to, I split ahead to Grantsburg there. I got to get back to the cabin and the creek, whatever. There was under the bridge over Yell River there had a extra bay in it for the cows to go under to the other side, and there also was an underpass for them to go through, but they wouldn't go through that. They would rather wade through the water a little bit and go around underneath the bridge, and that's what we did most of the time. There was a spot out underneath that bridge where you could go out and fish. You had to kind of do the overhead thing to get out there, and then there was a cut-off piling that you could sit on, and that was pretty deep right there, and you'd catch rock bass right off that piling. I remember doing that more than once. First few times I'm sure it was with Dad, but then later on I was down there alone.
How close were you to the water where the house and the cabin and stuff was at?
Not close at all. That was actually east of the barn. The barn had the best view. If you were gonna, you wouldn't even want to build a house there. If you're gonna build a house for a view of the river, it would have been behind the barn, out in the pig pen somewhere. But the barn was closest to the river, and then the big house was further away, and so the little house, the log cabin, was right across the road from it. The driveway went up into the yard and then made a loop round in front of the barn. Went past both houses.
Do you remember moving to Grantsburg?
Yeah. Not a lot about it, other than that's where I got my first bicycle. That was in the granary. Old piece of crap. Had to wedge it 2 or 3 ways as you tightened up the bolts to make it miss as you pedal it, because the rim was broken. But that worked. That's what I learned to ride bike on. Then later on, I got after we moved to Grantsburg, quite a while later on. I might have even saved my money. I don't know who or what that bicycle came from, but I got a Montgomery Ward bike. I think I still got the frame out in the woods yet. Not sure, but that was a mid-weight coaster brake again, but it pedaled nice, and I rode that back and forth to Danbury or Yell Lake. I would leave Grantsburg. You couldn't do this today, but as parents couldn't trust anybody then, or now, but then they did. I would take off from Grantsburg and pedal up to Yell Lake, and I did that several times every summer to visit Argene. And when I get there, I'd make a person-to-person call back to Grantsburg, because the long distance was quite a bit back then.
Right.
And then they would refuse the charges, but then they knew that I got there okay. That was the checks and balances to that situation. kind of jumping around here on where I'm at.
No, that's all right. The Grantsburg house, the Grantsburg farm. What was that like when you first moved there?
Well, it had been abandoned for several years. I think 3 or 4, or maybe even more. I don't know. Bob Milner was who owned it. That's who bought it from. Prior to buying that, though, we went and looked at a farm in Ladysmith, and that was kind of a serious contender. And I think the soil was probably a little bit better there. I don't know where the money thing was. I think the money thing probably had a big bearing in it, because they could get a loan from Uncle Walt, as they called him. First Bank of Grantsburg. He was the money man. And
Walt Jensen?
Walter Jensen. Uncle Walt was, a common little.
Everybody knew him as that.
Everybody knew him as that. I think everybody owed him money. But there was a lot of grass. We had Alden Johnson and Smokey Johnson and probably Morgan Christensen. Those 3 for sure. I don't know who else was there, but we burnt the place off. I mean, massive fire, because all this dead grass is everywhere. I remember being on the edge of a swamp and the fire came up. I had to have no choice but to go into the swamp. It was fairly deep. It was, up to my waist, maybe a little deeper. Waded out there, but it's cool and nice out there.
Is that the Johnsons that lived just down around the corner then?
Smokey lived west of the Branstead School at the time, and Morgan lived straight south, but down on that road by the church, the Lutheran church. In fact, his son Mike lives there today. And Alden lived north of town.
Just people that you knew that helped out?
I believe, I don't know if this is fact, but I believe that Alden was Mom and Dad's best man at their funeral. I should know that, but I don't know that. I think he was. I seen his son, he was at the funeral. his son Dave was there. He came, and I told him that. I said, I don't know for sure, but I think your father was best man, but he was there because he had worked with Dad at Parker for years. When I left Parker, I gave all my tools to Dad. I lent it to him to use. I didn't need them anymore. 'Cause I remember, I don't know where I went after that. It might have been when I went out to work at the feed house. I'm not sure. But anyway, my clock number was 1706, and then I don't know if Dad's was 1707, or I think I was one of the original 6 people that were hired there. Everybody had worked down at Modern Matrix for Carl Salmonson was hired by Paul Christensen to start at Parker. So I was one of the original 6 people that worked up there, and it was pretty crude to start with. We only had a few machines. There was no guards on the side to keep the oil in place, and it was just kind of a mess. But it all worked, and eventually they got that all straightened out.
So the Grantsburg farm was you had the house and the barn there when you guys moved in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
House, barn, pig house, chicken coop. I remember jumping off the chicken coop in the deep. We used to have a lot of snow, deep snow. I mean, those are deep ditches out there, and they would be full, and then there was a snowbank on top of that. And that's how much snow we got all the time. But I remember jumping off the roof of the chicken house into the snow, doing a flip over and doing a bird in the snow. But lucky I didn't hit any plows or anything like that there.
So how old were you when Carolyn was born?
Well, we should be, I'm 8 years, let's see, is it 4? We're 4 years apart, so she would be 4 years.
So it's before she was born you guys moved there, or was she already born?
I think so. Yeah, I pushed her around the stroller up in that yard. There's a picture of that somewhere, that's why I remember that happened. More so than remembering pushing her. There used to be a pump out in the yard. The old pump. It goes around up and down. There was never a windmill, but there was a pump jack there. And then there was a long pipe going past the chicken coop up to the barn. It was all gravity. And when that pipe would quit pumping, it went into a stock tank in the attic or in the haymow of the barn. And that's what watered all the cows from that through the system. And when that was done pumping, of course, that would drain back down through the pipe and be empty, so it didn't freeze up. Grandpa Anderson must have put that in because that was there all along that I remember.
It's a pretty ingenious design.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a pretty simple thing that they did a lot.
Yeah.
Back then. So how many cows? You guys had cows?
Yeah, I think we had about 20 at Grantsburg. I don't know what we had starting out. I don't know how that progressed.
And that was the main. It was milk. Was the main.
Milk, yeah. I remember we castrated a boar pig. I wasn't involved with that, but he had somebody come out, and this sucker was big. I mean, big. 400-pound type guy. And they castrated him, and he about died. He was laying in the river for 2 or 3 days, laying in the water, and then he recovered, And then they shipped him, but for some reason, you're supposed to get more money if they're castrated, but I think that depends on market, because if the hog is going to Chicago rather than St. Paul, there's people down in Chicago that really like that sort of thing. They slice them up and eat them. But I don't know if they knew about all that stuff at the time.
What was it? You had to do a lot of chores and stuff around the farm. What was that like?
I don't remember a thing up in Yellow Lake.
No, in Grantsburg.
In Grantsburg, I can remember getting hay down, stacking bales in front of the cows on both sides. Occasionally I would get silage down. I think Dad did that most of the time. Well, later on, it changed. It progressed as we went along. But in the morning, all we had to do was like feed the calves. That's all I had to do then. Feed the calves, and same thing at night. We have to get down here to church. I remember when the Beatles were going to be on, and Elvis was going to be on. We had a TV then. I had to get down the chores early to make sure I seen all that, didn't miss any of that stuff. Yeah, we had a Rumasauce. Leroy Rumasauce was his name. He was a TV man. He had a whole double suitcase thing full of tubes.
Yeah.
That's all that went out, was tubes.
Yeah.
He'd come out with his tube tester, and the TV went to hell. They'd call him. He'd call him up, and he'd come out and fix the TV again.
Wow, how big was the screen?
It was decent. It was probably a 21-inch, but it was black and white.
Right.
I remember going over to what was his first name? John Wolf, I believe. Wolf, John. I think it was John, but Wolf's place, and watching. He had a little. That's the first TV I seen. A little round screen, maybe 10 inches at the most. And sometimes we went over to Ortman's Resort.
Like when was that? Like what? How old were you?
Little, I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know. We went to Ortman's Resort too to watch TV once in a while. We were friends with them. And there was a little bar, and they run a resort there with a resort bar in it. And that's where they had it. It's the first time I heard from the land of sky blue waters, and they had the ham sign there and all that stuff. They were pretty nice people. That was a nice little resort. And then there were the bachelor boys, Frank, Louie, and Eddie, they were retired from Chicago, and the story is one of them was an ex-boxer, and I think that was Louie, but he was kind of Louie. He was kind of like dizzy or whatever, but I never seen anything bad about him. And Frank, I think, he always had the lapel vest on with the suit coat and a little gold watch fob with an ivory Republican on it, the elephant. And he's the one that gave me silver dollars all the time. Actually, the silver dollars got divided up between the four of us, and I shared my share, but actually all of those silver dollars actually belonged to Carolyn and I, because we were the only ones that's where they came from. Maybe one or two of them could have been given to somebody, I don't know, but that was all right. But I also sold angleworms. I got 50 cents for 4 dozen. And around that chicken coop, Grandma and Grandpa had chickens, and they sold eggs to all the lake people. And they were stopping in buying eggs all the time. I got the idea, well, I could be selling these people worms because they live on the lake and whatnot. And there had been chickens, and they'd thrown the shit out, cleaned the coop many times over the years, and it was easy going. I mean, you could just stick the fork in the ground and flip it over and get quite a few worms. So I was selling worms and getting silver quarters for them, which I don't know where they went, but down the drain.
The boys from Chicago, were they connected? Was that the influence?
That was the idea. I don't know. I have my own ideas today. I believe that they had a car. It was like a Franklin or something. It was probably a straight 8 in it, and they didn't know how to drive. Dad would laugh about that when he'd be telling about how them started out, because they'd slip the clutch and then let the clutch out. It was in high gear is what it was, and then they'd be going. And they oiled it down with kerosene. They wiped the paint down with kerosene all the time.
All right, we're going again here.
Okay.
So you're telling some stories there. I don't know which ones you want to.
Yeah, we'll go back to the Bachelor Boys. Frank, Louie, and Eddie. we would go over to their house to visit occasionally, and Carolyn and I always got black licorice and Old Smoothie root beer, and I love them both yet. But that was pretty memorable because they always had that, and we didn't get pop too often or anything like that. We drank a lot of Kool-Aid, but pop was a real treat because it fizzed and stuff, you know. And then they went deer hunting one year, or I don't think they were hunting, but Dad had shot them a deer, and they went out to get it. And one of them had a black bear coat on, bear skin coat. He's out in the woods during deer season, picking up that deer. And then the road is different now, but the road used to go around the corner there, and they were trying to drag that deer up that slope. There's cars coming and going and stuff. Of course, there wasn't a lot of population then, so there wasn't a lot of cars, but here they are with this deer trying to get it up the slope, and they're out there with a deer that they didn't have a tag for. That kind of thing happened quite a bit. I'll tell you another story about Dad's deer hunting. He had shot several deer. I think there were 3 deer that had fallen over in the water by the Clam River Bridge. And they floated down, and some of them caught on a snag. And I believe it was a larrabee that came along and spotted the deer in the water, and Dad was sitting in the bushes watching all this shit, and they were trying to fish this deer out of there, which they ultimately did, I believe. That's what they got, that deer, and took it home. Nothing went to waste, I don't think, back then. That was with his 38-40 Winchester. That thing would fire quite rapidly. It didn't kick much, so you'd be pretty much on target, other than levering it down and bringing it back in, because the cartridge is straight neck, so there's not a lot of kickback to it. And I think it held like 14 shells or something like that, and bang, 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 bang. I don't know. I've learned my lesson on automatics. First shot, maybe the second shot, the only 2 that are any good. The rest of them are complete bullshit. You're just shooting wild. That's a fault of an automatic, I think, because you think you got a lot of shells and a lot of chances, but there's only a couple of them that count. Let's see, what else?
Well, we were starting to talk about the Grantsburg farm too. So, we talked about Carolyn coming along, then Diane. How old were you when Diane was born?
Well, we're all 4 years apart, so she'd be 8 years below me. I don't know how old I was then.
Yeah.
Not big on numbers.
I think 12 would be appropriate.
I'm lucky if I know my own age.
What were the girls' chores on the farm? What did they have to do?
I don't know. Don't think they did a lot. They helped Mom, of course. Don't think they had any actual. Well, Carolyn might have fed some calves or something at one time, but they weren't doing anything like getting hay down or any of that sort of thing.
So were your parents disciplinarians, or?
Pretty much, I think.
What were they like as parents?
No problem, but you didn't want to get Dad pissed off. He liked to kick you. When he was really pissed. That's when he couldn't catch you. He's doing anything he could to catch you, and it would piss him off too. And I'd just run away.
How about school? Where'd you go to school?
Well, I went to Lone Pine when we lived in Yellow Lake, and Ivo Paulus was my school bus driver, and he had a little station wagon, and they ran out that way and picked up, I don't know, 4 or 6 kids, something like that. Brought us to Lone Pine. I remember one day, I don't remember too much about that. I think he either got stuck or he got in a little accident. Pretty minor, I think, but there's nothing happened of it. That's just in the back of my head.
Hmm.
Other than that, I don't remember too much about him. I remember seeing in the paper that he'd passed away at one point in time. We went to the Yellow Lake Lutheran Church. That's just down the road from that tavern there. Well, you know where it's at. Not that far from home either. Oh, and then when we moved to Grantsburg, we went to Grantsburg. I was still in the. I don't know. I was in Anderson's lower class. She had 1 through 4, and Mrs. Scaife had Dagmar Scaife was her name. She had 4 through 8. And
this was in Webster or Grantsburg?
This is Grantsburg. This is Branstead, actually. Dagmar Scaife was her brother-in-law, I believe, was A.T. Nelson, and he ruled with an iron fist. And that pissed me off when I was later on. When I was in the insurance business, I gave talks to the driver's ed class about, things with insurance and whatnot, and I couldn't believe how disrespectful those kids were. They were talking and throwing shit around. In fact, I think I did it for 3 years. In the 3rd year, I just quit. I said, enough of that crap. Going back to A.T. Nelson, when we heard that A.T. was coming that day, it was like, ooh,
So he was like what was his role?
He was the administrator or the principal,
okay.
Overall principal. They have all kinds of them now, but there was only one
Right.
then. He was all powerful and almighty, and had probably a bigger reputation than I don't think he was a bad man at all, but we were just all scared to death of him. That's kind of the way it was. Kids were like that,
Yeah.
They had extreme respect. unlike today.
How many kids were at the Branstead school total, do you think?
I don't know. I'm gonna guess we had enough for a softball team. 30, 35 maybe, in both sides of it. It was split as a divider in half, and then 1 through 4 and 4 through 8. Yeah, we had the only thing we did for extracurricular, we got to go over to Wood River, or I don't think we ever played town, but Wood River was one of them we played, and that was softball. That was about it for extracurricular. There wasn't much else to do.
That school wasn't around. Was it around much longer after you left? So did you go all the way through 8th grade there?
Yeah.
So
then I went into high school. Yeah, that was open a while longer. I don't remember how long. I didn't pay attention to it. I used to drive that Studebaker down to the school and spin shitties in the in the gravel there. And I don't know if they were open then or not. Probably. I can't say.
Where was that school at? At Branstead, obviously, but I can't picture where.
It's the brick building.
Oh, okay.
It's the main one,
Gotcha. There's not a lot of buildings there.
No. It's field, farm, and then there's this huge building. They converted it over into a factory.
Oh, okay.
That one,
yeah, that one.
Carl Salmonson bought it, and he's the one that converted it over. And I don't know, he must have had some industrial development money or something. And then that got sold to somebody else. And there was a plastics outfit that operated out of there for quite a while. And then they had a death. And I don't know, probably had instrumental in shutting that down too, because some guy didn't do the lockout procedure and got his head smashed between a couple of dies.
Jesus.
As far as I know, anyway, that's the story that I heard.
So when you went to Grantsburg High School, where was the high school located there?
right by the gym. The building, one of the buildings burnt down in the high school fire.
It's where I would have went to junior high, right? Is that the high school? I guess is it the library now?
Well, not really. There was more to it than that.
Right,
There,
but that
yeah,
footprint.
same area, generally speaking. Yeah,
What was high school like?
no problem at all.
What'd you do for fun in high school?
Go to the football games Friday night, the away games. We on the bus and sing all the way down, sing all the way back, without alcohol.
Sure. um, how about friends and stuff? What did you do? You hang out with them and
Not much. I worked for Russell Johnson. Got $1 an hour for hard physical labor. And that summer I bought I think it was, I don't know if it was, I don't remember the make. I had a Suzuki. I don't know if that's what I bought the first time around. I bought a motorcycle from Cambridge, and we ended up taking it back. So I didn't have a motorcycle then. So then Dad converted my bike over, put that 1.5-horse motor on that with a sidecar with a hinge on it and a belt tightener situation, so you could step on that and it would go. Everything was cool except for when you went around the corner. It had a chain that picked up that side, but of course that's quite a bit. You could turn one way real good, but the other way was kind of flawed.
yeah.
Prior to that 1.5-horse Clinton motor was in a John Deere XX. It was 2 wheels in front with a steering wheel with a cable on it that pulled on one way, turned the wheel and wraps up the spool. And then there was a clutch on that same sliding board situation. Slid ahead, and that was how you run it. Push the clutch ahead and then tighten up the belt, and then you go. There was a transmission in there and further gear reduction. It was kind of powerful, actually.
What'd you guys do for fun as a family? You go anywhere or?
We would go to the lake swimming during the summertime. Usually after we'd hay, and then we'd go to the lake down to Thorson Park and go swimming. We went to into town. They had Friday night movies in the summertime, all outdoor movies, and they were free. Anything was free is what we did. We were quite poor, actually. We picked pickles during the summertime when the cows went dry, and that's what bought the grocery money, or that's what bought the groceries. And we were poor, but we didn't know it. I guess that's kind of how it is. I never felt poor at all. We had meat, and we had milk. We had plenty of potatoes. We had all kinds of vegetables, and Mom would can all kinds of stuff, and we would have all those potatoes.
Most of the stuff you grew?
Yeah. But then we also, I mentioned that picking pickles. Hector Enseth was he worked for Gedney, and he had a sorting machine. You'd go in there and you'd get graded. And I believe the number 1 pickles were like 8 cents a pound, and then it was 3 cents a pound, and then the big ones, they didn't give you nothing for those. And the 3 cent a pound ones were the ones you really wanted to try to get, because they weighed up pretty good, and the 8 cent a pound wasn't worth picking because took so many of them to weight up. It was offset by the weight, but you had to buy the seed from Gedney and then plant them and then take care of them. I remember we were digging holes for the hills and then putting manure in there, and then you cover that up and then plant the seeds. And we had a pretty good sized patch, like 1/4 acre or something like that, I suppose. And I also picked pickles for M. Ryan Olson down south of town. He was a commercial guy. He had I don't know how big it was. He probably had 5, 8, 10 acres, something like that. And he had a creeper rigged up where he pulled with a John Deere tractor with truck tires on it, so it would go slower. And he creeped down. You'd lay on this creeper was like 6 rows wide, and you'd lay on your belly, and you're just above the pickles. You pick them and throw them in a bin in front of you. But there were so many people there, you only got to ride that once in a while. The rest of the time you drag a sack along the road, and that was not fun. But you got paid for all that shit. It was okay.
What was Grantsburg like at that time?
No, Hitchcock had what was his first name? I want to say it's Alfred, but I'm not sure.
That'd be the director, Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, but it was Hitchcock. Oh, that's why I'm thinking that.
Yeah.
But I almost think that might have been his name. I don't know. I worked for him for a while. I sold popcorn up at the fairgrounds. But he had a popcorn stand between where Carlisle's building is and Wadine's store. There's an alley there used to be. And that's where he had his popcorn stand. He was there all the time on a weekend. So that was a big deal, just going into town, and that he would sell popcorn. And later on, they had races, stock car races up at the fairgrounds. And I worked for him selling popcorn, and I would be up there hawking popcorn. And then the cars would come around the corner, and they threw dirt all over the frickin' place. So I had open boxes of popcorn. Some of them were I guess they were closed, but some of them were open. And I would turn around and try to keep a shield of dirt out of the popcorn. It's a little bit crude, but nobody complained.
I don't know they did stock car races there.
Yeah.
Or where they do the demo derby.
Yeah.
Oh.
Except they used the whole track,
right?
Regular circle track.
That's interesting.
Let's see, Grantsburg. What else? Later on, Mackey's had I had one snowmobile, a 10 horsepower. That's quite a bit later on. And that thing cost me an arm and a leg, and I was doing nothing but working on it and then ride it for a little bit and work on it some more. I sold it, and I got all my money out of it, including what I put into it, and I thought, that's enough for snowmobiles. But snowmobiles were a big deal with Mackey's. Everybody had snowmobiles, and it was big. The only thing I ever bought from Mackey's, I bought my first rear-tine rototiller. It was an Ariens, which we still have. So they're pretty dependable.
Yeah, those things don't die, that's for sure. And then you went to college too for a little bit.
Yeah, I went to River Falls.
How long were you there?
Till I flunked out.
What were you studying?
1 year biology. I was there for one complete cycle.
What were you hoping?
I was hoping, my mother wanted me to be a veterinarian because Dad could have been a veterinarian rather than going to work for Al and Emil Stone. But he chose to not do that, and he would have been Goody Branson used to come out and do all our vet stuff with the cattle and whatnot. And he would say, yeah, you betcha, make that $10, you betcha. And that's how everything was $10. You betcha, $10. That was standard charge. And then he'd wash his boots, and he had a procedure he went through. In fact, I'm trying to think if I ever hired him myself. I don't know if I did. I don't think I did. I had I fed out 20 pigs one time to 200 pounds apiece, and then I shipped them all. Well, I had 3 litters of pigs. I bought a boar, so I had an unrelated boar, and then I bred these sows 3 times. We had 3 litters, and I sold the sows, and that was my first run-in with the IRS. I had Mr. Kiewit from Rice Lake. He had a trench coat on, he smoked a cigar, Mr. Tough Guy. And at the time I had a feed bill at the dairy of probably $1,000, something like that. For a while I was kind of trying to limit feed them, and I found out that didn't work because they weren't gaining at all. So I just fed them and whatnot. And anyway, this Mr. Kiewit, oh, I know what the deal was. I was running the gas station at the time. This is quite a bit later. And I owed all these kids that were working for him. They charged me, back charged me for stuff that I really shouldn't have been paying for, because they could have been exempted by a signature, but they didn't. I didn't know any better, and they didn't tell me. So I had this bill. I don't know if it was $400 or $600, something like that. And he's out there doing a collection run on me, and I just lost it. I said, "You just shut the hell up." I said, "I'll have enough money when I sell these pigs." He said, well, he asked me how much these pigs are worth. I said, "They ain't worth a damn thing right now, but if you just wait a little bit, when they're 40 pounds, I can sell them, pay my feed bill, and pay you, and everybody will be happy." And then he left me alone. So I've had a great love for the IRS ever since.
I don't think they have a lot of fans.
I'm sure they don't. Probably worse today. But it made me compliant.
Let's see. Yeah, what kind of jobs did you have? What did you do for work? And
well, started back with Russell Johnson there, and then that was my first job. And then I went to work for, trying to think how that went, the succession of things, I can't remember. Who was first? I worked at McDonald's that summer before college in a machine shop, and worked up in the mill room. That was Ray Swager was my boss, and he also did my taxes for me, and he was a pretty good guy. He sold Mason shoes on the side. And those shoes are good. I wore out 2 pairs of soles on one of those work boots that I bought from him. Had them resold twice.
So he ran a machine shop, sold you shoes to work in the machine shop, and did your taxes.
Yeah.
It's got every angle.
He had it all. Let's see, that was during high school. Trying to think if I came back. I must have worked. After that, I went to work in the cities in a machine shop. Went to Tool Products as one of them, and then there was another one down on Franklin. I can't remember which one was which. One of them was a job shop, and one of them was more of a tool and wasn't tool and die. It was tool and die, the real people, but I was just a grunt in there. I made timers for hand grenades. You know, they were machined out, and they were punched out actually, but they were pretty close precision type punch. It was a timer, a little gear runs across the thing, and that's just how many seconds it took to go across there. Then when I left, I think that's when Carl Salmonson got a hold of us. See, I'm not sure where I got into I went to work with Burnett Dairy out at the feed house for some time too, and I'm not sure where all this stuff fits together. Because I worked there I fixed everything around that place. They had nobody seemed to know how to wire, you know, and Peggy's dad had taught me how to wire. And there wasn't much to learn actually, but once you get onto it, you got it. So I was putting switches and stuff. And they were unplugging things, you know, like to run the auger to weigh out 300 pounds of feed in this thing. They would unplug it, and I put a switch on it, you know. Harvey thought I was the smartest kid in the world. It was Harvey Haves that I worked for there. He was a pretty good guy too. Actually, I should have stayed there. I think that would have been okay. Burnett Dairy grew and grew and grew, and I'd have been there. I'd have been next, and Steve Christensen was also there, and I'd have been competing for his job, or one of us would have been chosen if I'd have been there, but I wasn't there, so we took him. What can I say?
Yeah. Yeah.
See, I don't know where that came in, and then about that same time, game warden, oh, what was his name? Can't think of his name. He was former state patrol, and he was a local game warden here. And he stopped in at the feed house one day and asked me if I wanted to be a game warden. And I said, Christ, I said, I can't go. I couldn't arrest anybody for shit that I'd be willing to do myself. And so that was the end of that. But now I realize that at the time, now you have to have a college degree to even approach that position. I'd have been in like Flint right back then.
They're considered police officers now.
Peg, what was our game warden's name? Oh, Harder, Max Harder.
Oh, Harder. Yeah.
Sherry Harder, his daughter. She's a postmaster. She's retired now too, but yeah, Max Harder asked me that, and later on he hired North Star. Oh, what's his name? Why'd I have to stump myself again? Arne Nordstrom. He hired him, and he was his sidekick. And then at some point there, a little after that, I believe, is when I went to Modern Matrix. And Modern Matrix, I must have worked there for a couple of years. And I worked with Bill Teets and Dwayne Leon, Joe Leonard, Ron Salmonson, his brother. And it was...
All right, we're recording again.
Yeah, I was working for Carl Salmonson at Modern Matrix, and we made the brass parts that the lead type is cast in. And prior to proper offset printing, to print on cardboard, they had a deep relief on the lead type, so it had to stick out quite a ways. And we made those. Different fonts and different type styles and whatnot, and you would get an assignment, and sometimes you had to do it all the way through. You had to make the patterns, to make the plates, to engrave them with and everything, but you would take the photographic image of it, blow that up, clean it up, and then we'd photosensitize a plate, and then you would put an emulsion on there, and you go in the darkroom and you expose that image on there, and then you take that plate and you put it in an acid bath, and it rotated in an acid bath. It was quite a contraption, and it bubbled and all this stuff, and it wasn't hot, but it was pretty caustic, and that would etch away part, I don't know if it was which relief it took care of, but the part that was masked with that burnt on image stayed there, and the rest went away. And then you would take that and press it in a hot press, into plastic. And that plastic became your pattern when you were we used a pantograph, and you'd go, what you did here would be reduced down to 10 to 1 or whatever. And you do over here, you got a bigger one. Really precision too. It had to be within a half a thousandths or so. Everything. The color is the width of the letter, and the alignment and all that stuff was pretty precision. And we check our parts on an optical comparator, and that went well. Except that what happened was they developed offset printing during that period of time. I believe Dwayne Leon did the signature on the dollar bill, and that was during the time I worked there. That's our only claim to fame. But I went and I was down to the state fair, and they got a little display there with this printing stuff. I got in a conversation with that guy, and he was just going nuts, because there's not many people who know the terminology what we're talking about. And they had a Ludlow machine there, which is used to cast these types with. And I said, oh, you got a Ludlow machine. Just like, man, what's this guy? He knows what he's talking about. But anyway, that's what happened there. And then during that same time period, or towards the end of it, I don't know if we actually got laid off. I don't think we got laid off. I think we're still all working, and Paul Christensen got a hold of all of us that worked there and took us all up. That's clock number 1706. I'm the sixth guy hired there.
Mm-hmm.
We all went up, the whole crew went up to Parker Hannafin and started working there. The only one was John T. Olson. He came from McNally's. They snagged him out of there. I don't know how they got him to go there because he was a loyal guy. He never, in fact, that's what killed him. He never missed a day of work, and he got double pneumonia. He had polio when he was younger. He's a little bit screwed up that way. Kind of walked with a gimp and whatnot. And he didn't miss any work, but he probably should have. He might have been alive for a little longer. But that's where we all went, as Parker.
You thought the state fair, and it made me think beekeeping is something you did when you were younger.
Yeah.
Too.
I started beekeeping when I was about 10 years old. That was a 4-H project. Well, that was one thing that we all did. We went to 4-H camp. I started beekeeping when I was about 10. All bees were, I don't even remember what they cost back then. Now they're just outrageous price. It might have been $15 for a 3-pound package of live bees with a queen. Now they're 150. I know they're more than 115. They're probably 135, something like that.
125 last time.
Oh, I don't
probably more than that.
Yeah, they're just, it's nuts. And I can't afford my hobby anymore because they keep dying.
Right.
You know, the colony collapse and all that crap.
So where did you get bees from back then?
Mail order. They came from, I don't remember where I ordered them from, but it was a long ways away, and they'd show up at the post office and they'd call and they're just all like there's always bees hanging on the outside of the cage. They stay right there, but it makes everybody pretty nervous. You know?
How many? So you did that as a 4-H project when you were 10, just one hive?
Yeah.
And it just kind of kept going after that?
Yeah. I had 20 at one time out here. But I had overwintered, when I really got pissed off about this, I had overwintered 10 hives and only lost one hive. Then the next year I had a few more and lost them all, just like that. And they're just, you can't afford your hobby when you have luck like that. It's just, This isn't the best area out here though either, but there used to be some hay fields within 3 miles. They'll go 3 miles for foraging. But nobody's got hay fields anymore. There's all corn. So that's been promoted by the government and subsidized by the government and the alcohol trade and all that stuff. Fuel type alcohol. And
you don't think there's enough wildflowers and gardens to keep them?
Not really. There's one year I got what I believe, you still have some of it, I believe is probably blueberry bloom. I don't know how else to explain it. It came in early. It's dark, which I wouldn't think blueberries would be, but it's really good tasting, light grade. You know, it's not light by grade, but real light, sweet honey. It's pretty nice. But I don't really know where that came from. It's just my guess.
Interesting.
4-H camp, yeah.
4-H camp, yeah.
Yeah, we went to, I was the first guinea pig, I should say, and I didn't know better. I went to 4-H camp, and it wasn't our club going that day, it was Burnett County 4-H camp. So I'm up there looking around for my buddies, there's nobody there. So I spent 3 days, I think it was 3 days, 4 days, whatever, didn't know anybody. The only one I got to know a Gravison a little bit. I think that's the only person Dad knew Gravison, and that I was putting 2 to 2 together again. That's the only I talked to him. But I don't remember who else was up there. Nobody that I knew other than that person. That was pretty remote too. But then a little bit later, our club went up there, and that was just cooler than hell because I knew everybody that was, you know, there's the big boys and the little boys, and Brian Nelson and I were part of the little boys. And then the big boys would be Gary Peterson and his Agnes Nelson and Mrs. Peterson were sisters, and they had Mark and Brian and Barbara. They're all passed away now. And then Peterson's had Violet and Henry, had Gary and Sylvia. Sylvia's passed away, and Gary's still doing fine. And he had childhood diabetes, so he's done really well. I'm glad of that. They own the brewery down here
Yep.
now. The family does anyway.
4 Cubs or something like that.
Yeah. But we used to go up there. We cleaned that, that lodge. It's a beautiful place. There's a lodge there with log.
I think I've been there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Big stone fireplace. But we washed that thing down all over inside, scrubbed everything. It hadn't been cleaned for years. And then they would go to the main store over in Webb Lake and buy groceries. And if you got to ride away with, that was a real treat, And then we went down to Luke's Tavern and bought pop and candy and peanuts and all that stuff. And yeah, and then we would swim. I had a pretty harrowing experience there, though. We would go swimming every day. Of course, we went, Brian Nelson and I and Eddie Hayden was his name. He had epilepsy, and we went skinny dipping at night. Went out in the lake, and it's a long ways out in the lake because it's real shallow going out. And he has a seizure out there. And Brian and I we don't know where he went down. We're combing the water. And Brian found him, pulls him up, and he's still having his convulsions and shit. And then we're way the hell out there. We had to run him back into the shore. I mean, I was so scared he was going to die on us.
Right.
It was frightening. But we were going to start doing CPR on him or whatever. We didn't know what we were doing, but then he puked. And when he puked, he got rid of all that stuff. And then he was breathing again. And then it was okay, but it was pretty harrowing for a bit.
Did you tell anyone what happened, or just let's just go to bed now?
No, I don't think we did. I don't know. I don't remember.
You guys had foster kids too.
Yeah, Brian, Jerry Johnson and Martin Johnson.
How old were you when they came around?
Oh, I'm guessing probably 7th grade, something like that. 6th, 7th, somewhere in there. Martin's passed away. I don't know about Jerry. In fact, I just stopped about a month ago thinking I should look him up. And I stopped at the bar there. What's that new bar called? Peg?
Where?
In Hurdle. Junkyard.
Oh, the junkyard bar.
Junkyard bar. I stopped in there, but it was closed that day when I came back. That's when I went up to Hayward, and it was closed that day because I was going to ask and see if anybody knew who that was or if he was around, because he lives right in or did live right in Hurdle, as far as I know. Now I can't stand where he lives because you wouldn't know.
Yeah. What was the story there?
I think the parents were drinking all the time and they left the kids alone, and social services picked them up, and that was the end of that. Mildred Celine was a social worker. She came around and checked on them all the time to make sure we're taking care of the kids right and all that.
They must have. I mean, your parents must have talked to somebody about being willing to do that or something.
Yeah. There was extra money,
Sure.
They got paid. I don't know what it was. I really don't know, but I'm guessing they probably got a couple $100 a month. And then they got all the commodities and stuff because they were
Right.
eligible for that.
Plus they had extra help if they wanted it to.
Yeah, I got a couple more handles.
How old were they when they were around?
Jerry was pretty little. You know, that's a Didic do. But I got to tell you about what he did to me that pissed me off. He would bite, and I must have bit him back, and then he bit himself really bad to make it look worse.
Oh my gosh.
And that pissed me off. But overall, we got along okay. Martin had a little problems in school, I think. I really don't know any issues about that, but I don't think he was older and he had an attitude and whatnot. Jerry was young enough that he didn't have any problem. I just remembered a story about the farm. I had a cot out in the pig pen, right in the pig house, and the sows were in a farrowing crate, and they could lay down one of two ways, and they couldn't move any more than that. And that prevented them from laying on pigs indiscriminately. So I was out there to make sure that every time they laid down, I checked them, and there weren't any pigs underneath them, because they lay on them and they would suffocate a pig and not even know it, because they don't necessarily have a chance to squeal when they get hurt. So that's where I spent the night before John F. Kennedy was shot. And I got up in the morning and, I was listening to the radio, that's what I heard it. And that was just shocking. It was just devastating. Our president's been shot,
Mm.
That was back to the Elvis song. That reminds me of another story I thought of. Elvis. Well, the Beatles, I seen them on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I seen the Elvis. But Elvis had been on, and that's when I was in grade school. Well, I had to have been at least in the 5th grade, 6th or 7th. I don't know where the timing comes out, but I had seen Elvis on TV, and he did that hip movement. So I was out in the cloakroom, and I was doing the hip movement, walking through there. And Mrs. Scaife caught me doing that, and she didn't like that. She thought that was some kind of sexual deal, and it was really bad. And I got reprimanded for that. I don't know how. She was pretty stern, though. I remember that, and she was really pissed at me. Oh well, she got over it, I guess.
It's funny what sounds like benign now.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Overall, it was all good.
Do you want to? I guess when I talked to Grandpa, it was mostly just about childhood stuff. About growing up. We could just keep it at that, or if you want to add any other stories that were, it's probably, I don't know.
I'm all storied out.
Yeah,